jotted down on the list was the value of money. People thought that money was very, very important. Well, money is very important. And of course, we all want a prosperous nation in which everyone can flourish materially. But boy, that's secondary to those spiritual values, faith in God, devotion to one's spouse and one's family, love of one's country, service to one's community. Those are the things that count. And not only do they count, they are the historical foundations of our strength and unity. After all, we in America, we are not a nation whose sources of strength and unity are bonds of blood or soil or throne and altar. We come from many different ethnic backgrounds, many different races, many different religious traditions, many different cultural histories. So it's not that stuff that binds us together. That binds a lot of other nations together. But that's not what America's sources of strength and unity are. So what are they? Well, certainly they are our shared commitment across lines of race, ethnicity, religion, and so forth to our constitutional system, to our republican democracy, to our freedoms as such as those articulated in the First Amendment to our Constitution. But by themselves, they are not enough to hold a people together. So what else? Well, the what else is a common commitment to faith in God, understanding ourselves as one nation under God, understanding ourselves as a people dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And then there's the importance, traditionally, not simply for Christians, not simply for people of this or that particular faith, but across the spectrum of faiths, the commitment to fidelity to one's spouse and to one's family, dedication to that little community, the cell of all of society, that basic unit of the family. And of course, whether one is Catholic or Protestant, Christian or Jewish, or some other religious faith, for Americans historically, we shared a love of our country, a dedication to it, a willing to sacrifice for it. Some, of course, of all traditions of faith, gave the last measure of devotion, the last full measure of devotion, as Lincoln described it, on the battlefield in war after war, fighting for our country. And then, of course, devotion to our local community. That was always an American value, not specific to any one creed, not specific to any one race or ethnicity. The idea that we should serve our communities, be contributors and not just takers, was a shared basis of our strength and unity. So when I read that Wall Street Journal poll and saw the erosion of these values, it seemed to me that something had to be done. And so, on the basis of the authority vested in me by absolutely nobody, I declared June to be Fidelity Month. And that gave rise to a grassroots, and it's truly grassroots movement to try to call our country back to those traditional sources of unity and strength, to faith in God, fidelity to one's spouse and to one's family, dedication to one's country, our country, the United States of America, and to our local communities, which we need to serve and not just be takers. And so now it's 2026, and we're approaching June, which will be for you as possible out there to become involved in our movement. Come on to say a word about how you can be, ways that you, on your own, and with your friends and family members and others in your community, can become part of our movement, can contribute to this effort. Today, we're going to be focusing on fidelity to country. We're people of faith, and we all recognize that our ultimate allegiance is to God. But that doesn't mean that we don't owe something to our country. That doesn't mean that patriotism is a sin. Our various faiths teach us that patriotism, far from being a sin, is a virtue if patriotism is properly understood in this nation under God. And so I'm delighted to be joined today by two distinguished archbishops. Salvatore Cordileone is a native Californian born in San Diego. He studied philosophy as an undergraduate at the University of San Diego. and then did graduate work in theology in Rome at the legendary Pontifical Gregorian University. He was ordained a priest in the Diocese of San Diego, where he later became an auxiliary bishop before becoming the Bishop of Oakland, California, and then the Archbishop of San Francisco. Alexander Sample was born in Montana. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees from Michigan Technological University in engineering. Discerning his vocation to the Catholic priesthood, he earned additional degrees from the College of St. Thomas and the Pontifical College Josephinum in Ohio. Archbishop Sample was ordained a priest of the Diocese of Marquette, where he became chancellor and then later the bishop. In 2013, he became the Archbishop of Portland. Archbishop Cordileone, Archbishop Sample, thank you for joining us for Fidelity Month.
Good to be with you.
Welcome. Yes, good to be with you.
Good, thank you. Well, as I mentioned, Fidelity Month is an interreligious effort. It's a grassroots movement that unites Protestants, Catholics, Christians, and Jews, people of every faith, every tradition, who share these common values. And before we launch into the specific discussion of fidelity to country, patriotism, on this 250th anniversary approaching of the Declaration of Independence, I just want to commend you, Archbishop Sample, and the whole body of U.S. Catholic bishops for the very important statement, the video that you released condemning anti-Semitism, making clear that from the point of view of the Catholic Church, from the point of view of Catholic doctrine, there is no legitimate place in any society at any time for contempt or hatred toward our Jewish neighbors, our Jewish brothers and sisters, as the late Pope John Paul, St. John Paul II called them, our elder brothers in the faith. And so I think at this time of rising anti-Semitism, it was especially important that the bishops speak, and they did speak, and yours was the voice chosen to speak on their behalf, Archbishop Sample. And I can tell you from the reaction of my Jewish friends, that was a very, very welcome intervention on your part. Do you want to just say a word about that before we launch into the substance of today's discussion?
Yeah, the U.S. bishops issued the statement, and as you say, I was selected to be the spokesman for that. I'm chairman right now of the Committee on Religious Liberty, and as part of the work of the committee is to combat any anti-religious bigotry in any form directed against any group whatsoever. And I think it's important that people realize that the bishops of the United States are not just concerned about protecting the religious dignity and liberty of our own Catholic people, but for all people of faith. And it was issued at a particular time. It was issued as we approached Holy Week. And the reason that time was chosen is because there's often a rise in anti-Semitic sentiment and behaviors around that time, around our celebration of the Paschal Mystery, and all sorts of old ways of addressing the Jewish people as somehow being corporally responsible for the death of Christ. It often happens, and sadly, even in Catholic circles, there are some groups that still harbor a sentiment along those lines that all the Jews as a people are somehow responsible for the death of our Lord. And so we chose that time to issue the statement to really celebrate our celebration of the Paschal Mystery, but also to remind people not to use it as an opportunity to direct any kind of hatred toward any group. And the Jewish community, it was that group that is often targeted at that time. And I can tell you, I had the same experience. Many Jewish relationships that I have reached out to me after that and expressed their profound gratitude for the church speaking up on that. So we were very proud to speak against such vile sorts of sentiments and behaviors.
Well, it was a beautiful statement, and it came at a time when, let's be frank about it, we're seeing an unexpected, at least unexpected by me, spike in anti-Semitism, and it's affecting lots of communities, including the Catholic community, like you two archbishops. I myself am a Catholic, and I hate to see this. I hate to see this in our Catholic community. I thought we were past that. The beautiful statements of the recent popes, the profound teaching of the Second Vatican Council in the Doctrine Nostra Aetate, not only condemning anti-Semitism, but affirming God's unbroken an unbreakable covenant with the Jewish people, first to hear and respond to the word of God. At this moment when we're seeing this spike, this is when I think it can't be left to the Jewish people themselves to defend themselves. We have to be in the forefront of speaking up. And we, in the Fidelity movement, greatly value the participation of our Jewish brothers and sisters and our brothers and sisters of all the different faiths. So thank you again for that
I think
statement.
just to point out too that this teaching that the Jewish people as a whole are not responsible for the death of Christ goes all the way back to the Council of Trent. So sadly it's a lot in the more traditional community that hold this anti-Semitic sentiment, and Trent is the council that they really hold very firmly to. But it was the Council of Trent that also made that very strong statement that there's not a corporate responsibility for the death of Christ.
Well, the church is very clear about this today, no question about it. And you iterated that and reiterated that. Archbishop Cordileone, we're approaching July 4th. That will be the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the establishment of the American Republic. This nation under God, dedicated, as Lincoln said, to the proposition that all men are created equal. How should we, as religious people, of course, you're speaking as a Catholic archbishop, but I know that you're in touch with your colleagues in other faiths as well. How should we, from the perspective of faith, think about what we owe our nation? How should we think about patriotism? Do we have to worry that patriotism can become a kind of idol worshiping, that we can put the nation above God? How do we get it right so that we're both people of faith, but also patriotic Americans?
Yes, well, actually, we have a very active interfaith council here in San Francisco, so we collaborate a lot, very well with a lot of different faith groups and very diverse faith groups, but we're able to come together on critical issues. And certainly, part of that is that yes, you're right. Patriotism is a virtue properly understood. So it's for God and country, God first, and then country. So we have to understand God as our faith in God really is the basis for all the virtues we need to live patriotism well, to serve our country well, which involves a respect for people of different religious faiths. So I just want to echo what you've been saying about this rise in anti-Semitism. Oh, we're the same age, so the same thing with me. I never thought we would see this happening, and it's kind of close to me. I grew up, a lot of Jewish people in that neighborhood where I grew up, in the schools that I went to. They were my classmates and friends. I grew up two doors down from an elderly Jewish couple who were survivors of the Holocaust. This was still very fresh, when we were growing up. So I think it's very important. This is part of our faith commitment that we protect, as Archbishop Sample was saying, people of all faiths. So it's a matter of our life is meant to be a life of service, right? So I like the way you broke down the communities, right? Marriage and family, the communities in which we live, and then our country as a whole. This all speaks to the way God created us to be, to live in communion. God created us for communion, not for isolation. That communion begins in the home, and then the extended family, our wider community, and our country. So I think this sense of service and respect for others, but our common basis of the truths we receive from the natural law, which clearly the Declaration of Independence underscored,
Yeah.
and also in the Bible. I mean, the Bible, we're a biblically based country in terms of those basic truths revealed in the Bible with this Judeo-Christian ethic.
Yes, I think that what you're referring to is referred to sometimes by theologians. I think this goes back to Augustine. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, Archbishop Sample. The idea of the order amoris, the idea that there are orders of love, We have to love all of our fellow men, right? We really, that's the most fundamental commandment pertaining to our relationships with others. We love our neighbor as ourselves. And Jesus says we even have to love our enemies, but it's not a sort of an undifferentiated love. You say a word about that concept of the order amoris?
I think that, we are, that's very well put, Archbishop Corleone, that the human person is created, for communion, for the community, the social interaction. But there is an order of the love that we owe to individuals, and it really is a love that is owed to others. And it would start with that same idea that those closest to us, those that are members of our family first, is especially, we owe a special love for them and a special protection for them. They are entrusted to us in our lives in a very personal and a very intimate way. And so there's a special ordering of love for them. And then beyond that, I like this way that we're kind of looking at this as the various circles that go out from that. And then the wider circle of is our local community, whether that's our local faith community, our local civic community, as citizens, as those who are called to responsible citizenship, faithful citizenship. We have to be concerned for the common good of those in the wider circle of our social world, if you will. And then extending beyond that to our whole nation. And we are united as a nation. Yes, we have our families. Yes, we have our local communities, but we're also part of the national community of these United States. And that in the virtue of patriotism would call us to a special love for our own country, our love for our fellow citizens. And it's interesting, it kind of plays out in a kind of reverse way uh, of how we look at the area of what we call in our Catholic tradition fraternal correction.
Hmm.
That we have an obligation to fraternally correct those who are in error, but that obligation to fraternal correction is in varying degrees. I don't have the same obligation to correct somebody's behavior, that's living in another state far distant from me, as I would have the obligation to fraternally correct somebody in my own family who is on a wrong path and a destructive path. I have a greater obligation to try to bring about the reform and the correction of behavior on the part of somebody who's close to me, who I have a closer relationship with than I have with somebody that I have absolutely no, family or blood relationship to. It's not that I'm not concerned about that, but it's this idea that our love, which is for all, as we've been saying, is in those various degrees of love, and it really, I think, it plays out more in the sense of responsibility. What is my
Yeah. Yeah.
responsibility toward others? I can't be responsible for all of the citizens of the United States, but God puts people in my life that I am particularly responsible for to love, to try to guide, and to lead, hopefully, ultimately, to God.
Yes, very good. Thank you, both archbishops. Before we continue the conversation, let me just take a moment to remind our viewers and listeners, and we're delighted to have you with us today, that you're welcome to ask questions, and you can do that by using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So go ahead there, and you can type in your questions, and here in a few minutes, I'll take those, begin taking those questions from the audience. If I can go back for a moment, though, to Archbishop Corleone. Uh, you know, um, at the founding of the nation, we were always a pluralistic nation, including a religiously pluralistic nation. But at the founding of the nation, most of the diversity, religious diversity, was among different Protestant traditions, different Protestant communities. There was one Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, but he was the only one, and that reflected the small size of the Catholic community in the United States in those days. There was also a very small Jewish community. It's famous in American history because of the magnificent exchange of letters that occurred between that community in Newport, Rhode Island, and President Washington, when Washington was sworn in as president of the Jewish community, as did many other religious groups, wrote him a congratulatory letter, and Washington responded, and it's a magnificent exchange from the civics point of view because the Jewish community and the president really get to the heart of what civic life should be all about and what patriotism is really all about. But the overwhelming majority of the country in those days, of course, came from different Protestant traditions, and people from those traditions had to figure out how to get along despite their differences. But then later came the big waves of immigration from Ireland, from Southern Europe, such as Italy, from Poland and other places in Eastern Europe. And there was a period of considerable tension. It persisted even into my boyhood. I can still remember a bit of it when many uh, Americans whose families had been here for many generations weren't quite sure that Catholics really could be patriotic Americans. And the worry was that, well, they're not brought up with democratic values. They belong to a hierarchical church, and sometimes they would call it an authoritarian church, and they don't drink in the values of democracy. And then on top of that, of course, there were statements by 19th century popes that were very critical of democracy, of human rights, of religious liberty. Now, of course, those statements from those popes were made in the historical context of a response to the French Revolution. And so the ideas of democracy and of religious liberty and of human rights that they were condemning were the ideas of the French Revolution, which were very different from the ideas of the American Revolution, which, of course, those popes had much less acquaintance with. They were very, very familiar with French revolutionary ideology, not so much with the philosophy of the American founding. But over the years, of course, in part because of the heroic service of Catholics, along with men of other faiths on the battlefield, often giving that last full measure of devotion, the country as a whole came to see that Catholics can indeed be good citizens, the very best of good citizens. But what do you make of that history, Archbishop Cordileone, that history of Catholics having to, in a certain sense, earn the trust of their fellow Americans that we as Catholics could actually be loyal, patriotic, democratic citizens?
That is the critical distinction, isn't it, between the French Revolution and the American Revolution. The founders of our country took from what they received from our Catholic faith tradition in terms of the natural law principles of distinctions between spiritual governance and temporal governance. The church has always been clear about that distinction. The church has also had democratic-like elements in her governance. As I like to say, the church had rules for canonical elections centuries before our country was founded. So I think that's one thing different that our founding fathers took those principles and enshrined them and enunciated them as a Declaration of Independence, enshrined them in the Constitution, and they understood the importance of robust religious liberty as that makes that different from what happened with the French Revolution. Yes, it was a Protestant concept. So we're a Christian-inspired country, specifically Protestant. And yes, Catholics and Jews who later immigrated to this country did have a hard time fitting in. They were looked upon with suspicion. Just to give a couple of anecdotes, to show how bad it got, it at one point in our history, my godmother just turned 100 years old, and she's still
Oh,
sharp as a tack. So she's a valuable source of insight as to what the country was like back in those years in 20s and 30s during the Second World War. She recently told me that on job applications, they would ask your religion. And if you marked that you were Catholic, you would not get hired, especially if you were an Italian Catholic. There wouldn't be
uh-oh.
it was just outright disqualification. So I mentioned about a lot of my friends were Jewish in school growing up. A fellow I played in the band with told me he got into radio later, inspired by his father. His father served as a lieutenant in the Navy in the Second World War, and after the war, wanted a career in radio. He applied. He went to the interview at the studio, and this is what my friend told me. The employer told him, "Well, you're qualified, but I'm sorry, we don't hire Jews."
And
So
that's sad.
there was, yeah, but the re the fact is that, and this is where people of faith are so important, because we had a Christian ethos and conscience, the country got around to correcting that, right? Just the country got around to correcting slavery, got around to correcting Jim Crow laws in the South. Uh, we got around to correcting that because of the Christian inspiration of our nation. So this is where it's very important as people of faith that we see beyond kind of whatever the popular trend is of the moment or the mania of the moment, that we can see beyond. Patriotism calls us to do that. It's a theme that resonates closely with me. I was, well, like you, Professor George, in high school in the early 70s, so people our age can remember what the country was like then.
Oh, yeah.
Protests and riots against the institutions and rejection of patriotism. I was at that time aspiring to a career in the military.
Oh,
I was a very patriotic young man when I was in high school, and I look back on it and I thought I must have instinctually, I didn't have the cognitive, but instinctually sensed that something was off with that. So, as people of faith, we have to see beyond whatever the mania is of the moment to the founding principles that are enduring, they're true. So they apply in every age, in every culture, in every generation, and keep those clearly in mind, and so we can articulate them in the context of what's ever happening at that particular moment of history. But the point I want to come back to is that because we have a Judeo-Christian ethos in this country, we have a conscience and we can recognize wrongs that are being done and correct them. Those wrongs are being done not because we're a Christian inspired nation, but because of original sin. It affects everyone,
yeah.
being believers. But because we have a conscience, we can get around to correcting that.
Archbishop Sample, what Archbishop Cordileone just said reminds me of that concept that Martin Luther King talked about of the Declaration of Independence as what he called a promissory note. Uh, so when the Declaration was released, July 4th, 1776, of course, we had slavery and we didn't abolish it for many decades, and only at the cost of a civil war with unbelievable, unmeasurable, immeasurable carnage. And yet, even though Jefferson himself, the author of the Declaration, was himself a slaveholder, despite that contradiction right at the very beginning, Dr. King said, well, the principles were like a check. They're like a promissory note. And over time, we call in the note and we demand that the nation live up to its founding principles. When you hear the words of that second sentence of the Declaration, the real heart of the Declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When you hear those words, what do they mean to you, Archbishop Sam?
It means to me pretty much exactly what they say, that our human dignity, the dignity of every human person, and then therefore the rights that are attached to that human dignity are not bestowed by government.
Mhm.
They're not bestowed by any civil authority, but we are endowed with these rights. And we are endowed, each one of us, with a human dignity that comes to us from the hand of our Creator God. And that is so, we have to get back to really profoundly understanding what that means. That no government can bestow human dignity. It can recognize human dignity. It can
Mhm.
honor human dignity. It can put in place laws and protections for human dignity for all people, but it can't give to human beings dignity because we possess it. We possess it as sons and daughters of a God who created us in his own image and likeness. And then the rights that flow from that we all hold as citizens and that we seek to protect in this country, flow from that God-given dignity that each of us holds. I often use this example, and I imagine, in a let's say in a OBGYN office, and maybe it's an OBGYN office that also provides abortion services. And you can have two women sitting in the waiting room, if you will, of that clinic. One is there for the prenatal checkup to make sure everything is all right and is going to do everything that she and her husband can do to protect the life and the health of that child in the womb as they prepare to welcome that child into the world. And the other woman is there to have the doctor take the life of that unborn child in her. What's the difference? The one child is wanted and the other child is not. And so, from an external source other than God, dignity and the right to life is given to one and not given to the other, instead of a recognition that no, that both of these lives come from our Creator God and have a right to life, have a human dignity. So I think it's and that's often I think it's gets very confused in our culture today. Is that our rights and our dignity as enshrined there in the Declaration, come to us from God, and it goes back to what Archbishop Cordileone was saying, that this country was founded on those principles, and you're right. I love that quote of Martin Luther King Jr. It's kind of like a promissory note. It laid out. I think it laid out a vision. It laid out sort of how it should be,
Yeah.
and what we strive for. It's like this is what we believe, and throughout history, we've corrected those abuses against it. Here in the state of Oregon, uh, this state was admitted to the Union with exclusionary laws on the books here,
Yes.
where Black people could
Could not
not
come
live
in.
here. They
Yep.
could not live here. They could come, they could be here for a certain period of time, but then they could not settle here. So we think of the Pacific Northwest right now, and Archbishop Corleone, and on the West Coast, we're kind of the uber liberal part of the world and the country. But this very state that has that reputation now had that law on the books, and that had to be corrected. Obviously, thankfully, it was, but that really partially explains we actually have a very percentage wise, a very low African American population here in the state of Oregon, and it's the remnants of that injustice toward them. But I think the point is that all of our human dignity comes from God, not from government, and it's government's job, if you will, to uphold that dignity which is ours intrinsically, and the rights again that are associated with that.
Oregon was the place where, under the influence of the Ku Klux Klan, the second Klan in the 1920s,
People
tried to
people don't
ban
realize that.
religious education for Catholics. They tried to ban Catholic schools. And fortunately, the Supreme Court stepped in the 1920s and invalidated as unconstitutional that state law, that KKK-inspired state law that would have put the Catholic schools out of business and forced everybody into the public schools.
Yeah, I think people are kind of surprised, but when they think of Oregon, but we were a stronghold of the KKK, and they
Even though
were
there was
direct.
not a large black population, and remember that second Ku Klux Klan was every bit as hostile to Jews and to Catholics as they
Yes,
were to blacks.
there's an anti-Catholic sentiment that still is just under the surface here.
Yeah, we have to push back against that, of course, as well. What you put your finger on here, of course, is I think the idea that um, our dignity as human beings is not acquired or achieved, it is inherent. Nobody can give it to us other than God Himself. And as creatures made in the very image and likeness of God, we come into being already possessing that human dignity. In that sense, it's inherent. It seems to me the great achievement of the Declaration of Independence is to establish as a fundamental civic principle what I sometimes call the principle, the foundational principle of all sound morality. That is the principle of the profound inherent and of course, therefore, equal dignity of each and every member of the human family. That's why it really does function as a promissory note for us. Every great reform movement in our nation's history has harkened back to the Declaration of Independence. I've got a question that's come in over the transom, and let me put it. I'll put it to you first, Archbishop Corleone. The questioner recalls the famous statement by John Adams um, when he was asked about the Constitution, this new Constitution, after the convention. And Adams responded that our Constitution is meant for a moral and religious people and will not serve any other kind of people. Now, that's very interesting because, of course, there's no established religion. And very shortly after the Constitution's ratified, we had amendments forbidding an establishment of religion. And yet, here we have the great founder, the great patriot, the second president of the United States, proclaiming that our Constitution is made for, it's designed for a moral and religious people. What do you think he had in mind, Archbishop Corleone?
I believe he had in mind that a people cannot be self-governing unless the citizens are themselves, so each one is self-governing. That is, it's a virtuous citizenry that will make for a functioning democracy. It will not work if people are morally corrupt. If the citizenry is morally corrupt, the democracy is going to disintegrate. So that's why our founding fathers, they had this vision that they embraced robust religious liberty because they understood the virtue of religion instills the other virtues that a democracy needs of its citizens to be honest, to be hardworking, to be respectful, to be generous, to be faithful, Fidelity Month, right? To be patriotic. All of these virtues are necessary for a democracy to work.
I love the way you put that. If we're to maintain self-government, then the people themselves have to be self-governing. In other words, they have to be able to govern their own passions
Yes.
and behave in a morally upright way, even in the face of temptation. Does that strike you as right as well, Archbishop Sample?
I'm going to go back, yeah, very much so. And I would go back to, in quoting the pledge, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. One nation under God, indivisible. And I think that what Adams, of course, I don't know exactly what was in his mind, but the way I interpret that is that, if we lose our understanding that this nation is under God and that He ultimately is the sovereign of us all, uh, then there is the moral corruption, there is the selfishness, you
Yeah.
know, um, and I think that, all of especially the Judeo-Christian tradition, but I think, most religious traditions have some element of self-sacrifice, of selflessness for the other. And when we lose that moral compass and that human attribute of generosity and sacrifice for others, I think it corrupts that unity that is among us, and we aren't indivisible. I think if we look, I think to bring this into kind of our current cultural context. I mean, I think we're all around the same age roughly, and the I've never seen in my lifetime such division in our country, in our land, where the person who holds a different point of view or has a different political or ideological position is the enemy. And the whole cancel culture idea. I think it's as we've seen the secularization of our culture and sort of the forgetting about God and not living under the moral code that is written in the human heart, as Archbishop Corleone pointed out, through the natural law, and then is further reinforced and explicated, if you will, through the religious traditions, especially the Judeo-Christian tradition. Those are the things that not only help us to live moral lives of service and sacrifice for others, especially our families, um, and leads us into a self-absorption, a selfishness. Um, this is what creates division among us. And I'll reference back to your visit here recently to Oregon, Dr. George, with Cornell West. And here you've got two individuals who, let's face it, hold some very different political and philosophical positions. And yet you demonstrated to us here in Oregon such profound friendship and, dare I say, love for one another.
Indeed.
And it was genuine. It was evident. To me, it was modeling, what we should be about as a country. And both of you are men of faith, and you're driven by those religious and moral principles that hold us together as a nation. I fear where we're at right now in terms of this divisiveness in the culture. But I think it's because, so many of us have forgotten about God and that equal dignity that is inherent, intrinsic to each and every human person, and that we're equal. And we should love our fellow citizens, even those with whom we vehemently disagree. We should love them because they are our compatriots.
Archbishop Sample, you just echoed two great prophets. One was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and the other was Abraham Lincoln. Both attributed the ills of America at the time at which they spoke to the forgetting of God. Lincoln, in the midst of the Civil War, declared a day of thanksgiving and repentance, in which he said, "We have forgotten God, that in our wealth and in our luxury we've forgotten God." When Solzhenitsyn came to speak at the Harvard commencement in 1978, he said the same thing, that our ills and our weakness and our vices have come because we have forgotten God. And I'm reminded that the original Pledge of Allegiance in the 1920s did not have, when Congress adopted it, the under God. It was one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The one nation and the indivisible, obviously indivisible, hearkening back to the Civil War, which divided the nation. It was in the 1950s that the phrase "under God" was added by Congress, after a campaign on behalf of adding those words that was led by the Catholic group, the Knights of Columbus. And where did they get the language? Did the Knights of Columbus just come up with the words "under God"? Well, no, not at all. The words come from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, where in the closing sentences, that prayer with which Lincoln closes the Gettysburg Address, where he says that this nation, under God, will have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Well, we have another question, and we just have time really for one more, but it's a good one, especially given the concerns that the two of you and your brother bishops here in the United States and really around the world are concerned about. The question is, what do the panelists regard as the greatest threat to religious liberty in the 250th year of our nation? So I'm inferring from the question that the questioner is interested in the greatest domestic threat to religious liberty. We all know, of course, there are very grave threats to religious liberty around the world. But what would you identify as what worries you most when you think about religious liberty domestically here in the United States? Archbishop Corleone?
The society has to have some kind of a shared value system, and that's what we're in conflict right now, and
Mhm.
because of this division. Though traditional believers who adhere to basic truths that come to us through the Judeo-Christian tradition, and a new secular sort of a religion that is imposing itself on everyone and not tolerating any kind of dissent. So I see this as the faith communities begin to diminish, the government has more and more of a stronghold. And this is what our founding fathers, I believe, understood, that government has this tendency to overreach, right? And this natural draw to get control of the citizenry. But it's the church, the faith communities that are the barrier between the government and the people. This came through in a letter, by the way, that the U.S. Department of Justice sent to the then mayor here in San Francisco when they were keeping worship shut down, allowing everyone else to open up. That
During COVID,
during
you
COVID,
mentioned.
yes,
Yeah.
that the Constitution's unyielding protection of religious believers is what separates the United States from places ruled by tyranny and despotism. So it's this religious liberty benefits everyone, not just religious believers. But I think it's this tendency for the government to gain more and more control and impose a different sort of secular orthodoxy on everyone and dismiss or punish those who don't comply.
Archbishop Sample?
Yeah, that's very good, Archbishop Corleone, and that's a good lead-in. I'll explicate that in terms of the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Religious Liberty. You know, we put out an annual report each year on religious liberty and the threats to religious liberty and our efforts to secure religious liberty. And I'll just mention three that make more explicit what Archbishop Corleone just said. Number one is the exclusion of religious organizations, religious groups from certain privileges, certain rights, certain benefits that are afforded others, but are excluded. We are excluded from those things, us and other religious groups, because of our religious beliefs. You know, we can't receive certain services, we can't receive certain privileges, certain benefits because of our religious beliefs. We're excluded because we are a religious organization. That's one area. There's a lot of things in there, but that's one kind of general area of threat. A second is the forcing and the overreach of government, as Archbishop Corleone was saying, to impose upon us um, policies or actions that we would be required to take that violate our moral and religious principles. You
The
know,
so-called
this
mandates. They call those the
yeah,
mandates, right? Yeah.
exactly. Well, this committee, the Committee on Religious Liberties, began as an ad hoc committee of the Bishops' Conference in response to the Affordable Care Act when the administration at the time was trying to force the contraceptive mandate. And we had to rise up and fight against that. But that's an example where government is trying to force religious organizations to do things that violate their moral and religious principles. And then the third area we've kind of already talked about at the beginning is the whole general area of religious bigotry against any group. You know, we talked about anti-Semitism, but you know, this rise that we have seen in anti-religious behaviors, attitudes, and even violence. Um, you know, our my pastoral center here in the Archdiocese, just in the last few years, three times has been vandalized with horrific
Yeah.
things spray painted on our pastoral center. Somebody broke through our front glass doors and poured in a bucket of red paint, and then wrote all kinds of things on the wall that I won't repeat. Uh, and you know, so that's a threat. Anytime any religious group is threatened, is attacked, is villainized in any way, it's really a threat against all of us who are people of faith. So in general, there's a lot of specific examples within those categories, but those are the three general areas that the bishops are most focused on in our efforts to secure and guarantee religious liberty for all people in this land.
Thank you, Archbishops. Let me invite my friend Christopher Parr to come on now and tell folks what they can do to be active in the Fidelity movement. June Fidelity Month is coming up. We've got great suggestions for how you can observe Fidelity Month and help to spread the word. Christopher, tell us about it.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Professor George, panelists. Such a wonderful conversation. And yes, we are 16 days away from the start of the fourth annual Fidelity Month. As Professor George said, Fidelity Month is a grassroots movement, so it's not something we engineer. It's something that all of us do together. And so there are many different ways you can celebrate Fidelity Month. And all of those are on our website, fidelitymonth.com. That's the best place you could go. But I'll just mention a few highlights. So if you've seen this webinar, you've seen the flyers for it, then you've already seen our Fidelity Month icon, which is a gold myrtle wreath. That's a classical symbol of fidelity on a blue field. And so we ask that you display it, share it widely. We want the airwaves to be filled with it during June. The easiest way to do that is digitally. So you can use that as a temporary profile photo, a banner photo on your social media. You can also do it physically. So we have t-shirts, hats, flags, yard signs, banners, and all the rest under the merch tab on our website. Just a word, those are sold at cost. So we're not making any money on that. Not making any, Fidelity Month is not a profitable thing, financially speaking, morally speaking, and spiritually speaking, yes, but not financially. So
But
just a word
you
about
can
that.
use the digital imagery as your social media profile picture and that sort of thing for nothing, right? That's completely
Oh,
free.
exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
there's a resources page you can go to on the website with all those downloads for free. Uh, Also, one of the biggest ways you can help us get more exposure is just by following us on social media. So we're on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube. You'll see resources on there about Fidelity, both especially during June, but then also just throughout the year. And then we also have a Facebook group, Fidelity Month public Facebook group, where you can meet others and connect others that are part of the movement as well. Also, we'd encourage you to pray the Fidelity Month prayer that's right on our homepage that asks God to help us all grow in faithfulness. And we've written it so it's something you can use in your own devotional time. But also, if you're leading a congregational worship service, we think it's appropriate for that as well.
And
We
of
need
course,
your
you can feel free to tailor. I'm sorry to interrupt, Christopher, but feel free to tailor the prayer to your own tradition.
absolutely.
It's an interfaith prayer. I don't think anything in it would contradict any believer's faith, but you might want to add to it or put it in a certain context or change this or that. We're not trying to dictate anything. We just want you to pray for fidelity. Pray. Let's support each other in prayer for fidelity to God, fidelity to spouses and families, fidelity to our country and communities.
Absolutely. That's a really important point. Fidelity Month can look different in each community because each of us have unique responsibilities that God's given us to our congregations, to our families, to our communities. That's very important. We do need your help in spreading the word about Fidelity Month in your community. So that for you, that might be a letter to the editor. For many of you, we'd encourage your elected officials at the state level, at the local level, your mayor, your city councilman, to recognize Fidelity Month. We're glad that many elected officials are already doing that, and we want more people to do that. There's some excellent model text that public policy people have helped us craft that's on that resources tab on our website. You can just take that, share it with your state representative, your state senator, maybe even your senator if we're getting ambitious. We hope that that's easy for you to use. And then finally, also, you can ask your congregation to talk about Fidelity Month. Maybe use that prayer Professor George mentioned in a service. You could put a notice in the bulletin. You could host maybe an educational speaker on the importance of any of these values. We're really grateful. Some clergy have even preached sermons and homilies and even series of sermons and homilies on Fidelity Month during June, and we're very grateful for that. Two more things. Those are things
Yeah.
generally. Oh, go ahead, Professor George.
Go right ahead, Christopher. Yeah,
Yeah,
finish
yeah,
up.
just two quick things that you can do this year in particular that haven't been true in past years. They're unique. So for on Friday, June the 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to be hosting our kickoff webinar that we do every year. And the topic is an especially important one for our 250th anniversary. It's called We Hold These Truths, Fidelity, and the Declaration. Professor George will be moderating that, but we have Dr. Ben Carson for that, Erica Bakiaki from Arizona State University, and then Devora Goldman of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. That'll be a fantastic conversation. So we'd encourage you to join in on that. That will also be on Zoom, and you will be able to register on our website.
The
And then
date is June 5th, Christopher.
Friday, June 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Zoom.
Very good.
The final note is something we're very excited about this year, which is our high school essay contest. If you know a rising high school junior or high school senior, this is for them. And so you can go to our website and see the prompt. We're just asking them to write 700 to 1,000 words or so. The prompts relate to these themes of fidelity that we've been talking about. We're giving away some pretty sizable prizes for high school students, so there's good motivation there. And then the first place essay is going to be published in the Public Discourse online journal, a great opportunity for students. Submissions for that open June 1st, and they'll close on July 31st. So something good your students can do this summer. Let me say one more thing. I want to especially also thank our co-sponsor for our webinar tonight, the USCCB Secretariat of Laity, Marriage, Family Life, and Youth. Many of you are here because they advertise this webinar, so we're so thankful for them and would encourage you to check out the resources they have about how to build a strong marriage and family.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you for your great leadership for Fidelity Month and the Fidelity
Mhm.
Movement. And a very, very special thank you to our two wonderful panelists, Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone and Archbishop Alexander Sample. Uh, 365 days a year, these two apostles genuinely model the kind of fidelity, the virtue that we are promoting here. And so I'm especially grateful to them for coming on and being our guests as we look ahead to Fidelity Month in this semi-quincentennial year of our country's founding, of the Declaration of Independence. So thank you, Archbishops, and thanks to everyone for joining. Hope we'll see you again on June 5th for our official launch, June Fidelity Month broadcast.